Welcome back, everybody, to the show. What a day it is. Debate night in America. The unprecedented and historic debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and disgraced former President Donald Trump. What a night. And for something this big, I have to be joined by one of my favorites and yours, Josiah from Pondering Politics. Josiah, how are you feeling on this monumental night?
Well, first, Luke, it's great to be with you as usual. And listen, I've got something to say. You know me. I am a cynic. I am a pessimist. You're the optimist. I'm the glasses half empty kind of guy. You're always the glasses half full kind of guy. And together we have a full glass. But our cup runneth over tonight, buddy, because I am actually optimistic. I'm saying it right now. We need two full glasses because I am optimistic. I think the vice president is going to kick butt.
Oof, that is good to hear. Welcome to everyone joining us around the world. And you are either watching on my channel, Luke Beasley, the channel, or Pondering Politics, Josiah's. We're dual streaming this. And I agree with you. I think, interestingly, I agree. Normally, you're the cynic, I'm the optimist. And I am optimistic about this election and about tonight. But I've been shocked, regardless of how confident I am in Vice President Harris's ability to debate Donald Trump. I have been shocked with the heart palpitations, the anxiety attacks I've been dealing with today in preparation for tonight, knowing that with everything we discuss on a daily basis, what are we, 50-something days away from the election? For years now, on our respective shows, we've been talking about the stakes of this election. And if you had to pinpoint one moment since Vice President Kamala Harris has jumped in the race that could actually make the difference in this election, this would be the moment.
Of course. I mean, that's people are talking about the excitement, the fervor that's generated by such a truncated campaign. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars raised, just blowing Trump out of the water with respect to fundraising, thousands upon thousands of new volunteers. The excitement's there. But to your point, when you have such a short, truncated campaign, it also leaves no margin for error. So this is the single highest profile event that the vice president will have. And that means there is a lot riding on it, and the stakes are quite high. Very true. For the first time in a long time, I am confident that even though we have one shot, to quote the great sage philosopher Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, even though we have one shot, I think the vice president is going to nail it.
Wow. Now let's get to a little bit of pre-debate stories that I want to get your reaction to, Josiah. Jaden, if you would put this up on screen, we have the Real Clear Politics polling average. And the swing states, I think you can essentially say the ones that are in play are tied. But here, the national, to give you a sense of the sense of the race, the momentum, we saw, and I extensively covered it, and know you did as well, Josiah, Harris getting the race, and every single day that she was in the race, she would gain in the polls, it seemed. And she had this insane momentum. Something concerning is happening. I don't think it's full panic mode time yet, but Trump is now gaining on her. She still has a lead in this Real Clear Politics average of polls, but he now is experiencing some polling momentum, making up a little bit of what he lost, which is so irrational given what we know about the man. But what is your reaction to that, and why are we seeing it?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think you have to remember that Donald Trump has never been a particularly popular candidate. It must be said. He was never a particularly popular president. He never broke 50% approval rating as candidate or as president at any time. And his base is, for the most part, locked in. Now, of course, we're being reductive when we say that, because the truth is every political candidate has some room to grow, including Donald Trump. But what we're seeing now by a closing of the gap is that the vice president's potential is very clearly her political potential, her electoral potential, her ability to secure popular support is greater objectively than Trump's. But it is just potential. So there was that initial wave of energy, excitement, something new, something fresh, and people are clearly more willing to back her potentially than Trump's. But that we can't just take that for granted that energy will sustain itself. So I think what we're seeing here is the electorate is saying, listen, potentially you have the ability to pull more people than Donald Trump. And I think no matter what the outcome of the election will be, if Trump wins, I expect it will be by virtue of the electoral college and not by popular vote. He's never won the popular vote against any of his Democratic rivals. Which basically just goes to show that though the potential there is there for the vice president, she has to actually cement it. Whereas Trump, his support, it's already glued in.
And that's the question. It's less so is Trump gonna win over a bunch of new people between now and the election. It's can Harris win over new people?
Hold on.
To defeat his pretty established portion of the electorate at this point, this late in the game, probably isn't changing. And that's why, people will say, well, is this debate, since you don't have the potential cognitive concerns element relating to Biden, we have that with Trump today, but is this really going to be as big of a deal as it's being made out to be? Or like a lot of past presidential debates, it can go really well for one person by our standard metric or really poorly, and it doesn't make a huge difference in the election. But I actually think while the name of the game for Biden and why it became so disastrous for him was reassuring people he was cognitively fit at that debate. And so the performance really obviously negatively impacted his campaign, led to him dropping off the ticket. But for Kamala Harris, her thing and why this is such a consequential debate is, to your point, if between now and November, the whole task for her is introducing her to people who aren't as familiar as they are with Trump or Biden and winning them over, this is a chance like she's rarely going to have to do so. Any final take on that, Josiah? And then I want to play this JD Vance clip.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's funny. I think you hit the nail on the head with respect to the cognitive concerns, which right now, those are, according to the polls, squarely on the shoulders of Donald Trump. We've talked about this. We talked about this, quite frankly, when President Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee. You and I correctly, I think even now, I think we were 100% vindicated, pointing out the asymmetry in the coverage of Trump's mental state compared to Biden's. I still maintain it was wildly unfair. But the vice president doesn't have those concerns. Poll after poll after poll reflects that half to a majority of Americans, depending on the poll, Morning Consult or Bloomberg, it depends, think that Donald Trump is too old and too mentally unfit to be president. And quite frankly, I think this is also something that the vice president should do everything in her power to exploit during the debate.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be, there's a moment here to really establish what we know to be the case, but a lot of Americans haven't yet seen. The crazy, crazy contrast between a younger, more mentally fit, candidate and Donald Trump. Now, Republicans wanted so badly to make the mental stuff a part of the campaign when it was Biden. Now, that's going to come back to bite them. But here's this clip from JD Vance as a part of an all-in podcast event saying, yeah, if I were vice president, I totally would have thrown out the legitimate electors in service of Trump's election lies and his attempt to stay in power despite losing.
He was asked to not certify it.
Sure.
So would you have certified? I'll ask you for the third
Again,
time.
I would have asked the states to submit alternative slates of electors and let the country have the debate about what actually matters and what kind of an election that we had.
You
in
wouldn't
these
have
important
certified,
states.
to be clear.
I would have asked the states to submit alternative slates of
I think
electors.
that's what you're saying.
That's what I would have
So-
done. Again, I've said that publicly many times.
Josiah, are you still getting that clip audio?
I am.
Perfect. Less perfect is what JD Vance said there. We've heard him allude to this, but he's tried to wiggle out of it because you have really one option whenever you're Trump's vice presidential running mate, which is towing that line. But it is a disastrous and, in a reasonable world, disqualifying thing to say, which is, if you sort of missed in him trying to avoid the question a little bit, Trump and his allies got random people, not the actual lawfully selected, lawfully certified, lawfully elected electors in the different swing states that Trump lost, but instead other people to sign fraudulent forms saying they were the lawfully elected electors and they should be counted as a part of the electoral college, and then tried to send those to be certified. So Trump wanted Mike Pence to go, hey, yeah, the real electoral college counts in and we're going to certify it. But just kidding, here's a stack of electors I'm going to try to certify instead. And JD Vance is saying, yeah, I would have said to the millions of voters who went to the ballot box, voted in such a way that led to their electors being sent in favor of Biden, disenfranchise those people, pick Trump unilaterally as the president despite our democratic process. What's your reaction to him admitting that, Josiah?
Well, to your point, I mean, in a saner world with a more rational electorate, and I can say these things, and you can say these things if you want to be critical too, because we're not running for office. The fact of the matter is, that this election is so competitive is, in my opinion, is something where we have to do some real soul searching as the American public. We have an obligation to pay attention to politics, to care about our democracy. I understand the politicians themselves also have a duty to help inspire Americans to care, but it's a two-part process. The fact of the matter is, in a better world, this would have been the end of JD Vance's career, not just temporarily, but in perpetuity. Because, yes, what he is saying is that, yes, if given the position, I would have defrauded 80 million Americans. I would have defrauded more Americans than I would have supported, because you have to remember, Donald Trump didn't win the popular vote. So he, for the sake of 74 million people, he would have defrauded 80 million people and unlawfully seized power. And it just goes to show not just the total authoritarian impulse of the modern Republican Party and the fact that they're unrepentant with respect to Republican leaders. J.D. Vance had every opportunity to say, you know what, we went too far, or even he could have even cleaned it up, Luke, with a more politically correct answer without throwing Trump under the bus, saying, you know, listen, I firmly believe that Donald Trump is going to win this election fair and square. He's going to win the popular vote. He's going to win by the electoral college. I really don't want to think about the past. Mike Pence did. Like, he could have said so many things, but instead he just flat out said, with some prodding, that he would have done the exact opposite. And I'll also point out what's really gross about that is the inconsistency. It'd be bad enough for anyone to seriously entertain unilaterally throwing out a free and fair election. But what makes it even more gross is that J.D. Vance would never countenance such a suggestion if it came from a Democrat. Imagine if Vice President Kamala Harris were sitting on a podcast. She's the current incumbent Vice President of the United States, and she said something like that about the upcoming election, that she would have done what Mike Pence did not do and what Trump wanted Mike Pence to do, and effectively throw the election to her political party. J.D. Vance would be pulling his hair out. Republicans everywhere would be revolting. How dare you? But this is what we see. Rules for thee, not for me. Super gross.
So gross. And to your point, go with the logic for 2 seconds. MAGA. He's saying if he were vice president, as Pence was, at that period of time during the 2020 election, he thinks he had the constitutional right to say to states, no, that whole Constitution thing that, you know, you're following and sending, no. Instead, send what I want. Send the electors I want. And if you don't, we're not certifying the election. Who's currently the vice president? So you're saying Vice President Kamala Harris would have the power in this upcoming election, no matter what happens, even if Trump loses, to pick her own electors and say, I won the election even if I didn't. That's your argument. How do they not understand that? I don't know, but we could rant about that forever. Let's move to this.
I was just going to say one final thing on that score, Luke. While you were talking, it reminded me, John Eastman, the disgraced attorney behind that whole scheme that J.D. Vance says he'd support. Remember, because we've talked about this, he was asked by Vice President Pence's attorneys, like, okay, Mr. Eastman proposing this theory, does that mean Vice President Al Gore, Democrat, could have done it in 2000, that Vice President Joe Biden could have done it in 2016, or that future potential Vice President Kamala Harris could do it in 2024? Basically, that counterfactual was given to the guy who proposed this, and he had the audacity to say, no, that's all different. So it really is a thing where it only can be done, apparently. It's only acceptable to be done by Republicans. How pathetic is that?
We've talked about a lot, Josiah. The whole conversation about how Trump threatens democracy is a complex one. And sometimes people emphasize parts of it that are totally relevant, totally important, but aren't ones that can immediately shut someone down. And my recommendation to folks out there having conversations with MAGA, if you know they actually care about democracy, if they don't, and they give the answer, as many Trump supporters have given to me in interviews that I've done, of a dictator Trump is preferable to a democratically elected Harris, then the conversation is over. All right, we just have fundamentally different principles, and you don't like America, apparently. But if they do sort of like this thing we have going democratically, and they're just confused, not understanding that Trump threatens that, even though January 6th, as in terms of the attack on the Capitol, is such an important thing to talk about and include that, I always start with the fake elector scheme because of what you just mentioned, which is there is no response. I've never heard one. With January 6th, people will say, oh, no, but Trump said peacefully, patriotically, but Trump didn't actually want violence. And he sat and didn't do anything for just reasons. I don't know. There's also not an argument there, but they have one they'll throw forward that's weak, but they're okay with. It was a riot gone wrong. Oh, things happen. But while that's deranged, I haven't even heard one that makes any even narrative sense relating to that, because maybe they don't understand sort of logical consistency in the sense that they have to apply whatever they say about what Pence could have done to Harris in this election. They can't handle that. Here is wife of Donald Trump, Melania Trump, posting a video that raised a lot of eyebrows.
The attempt to end my husband's life was a horrible, distressing experience. Now, the silence around it feels heavy. I can't help but wonder, why didn't law enforcement officials arrest the shooter before the speech? There is definitely more to this story, and we need to uncover the truth.
So, I saw someone say, isn't it weird that she's being more conspiratorial about this than Trump is? While absolutely there were law enforcement failures, that's a given the fact that a shot was fired off and got so close to killing Trump. And that's something that should be investigated and is being investigated. And accountability should happen. We saw the Secret Service president or director resign over that. Right. Mm-hmm. But to do this sort of open-ended, there must be more to the story, and MAGA, you can fill in the blanks, it's concerning because it only serves to further exacerbate tensions in a time when that's not what we need.
No, not at all. It's incredibly irresponsible, incredibly dangerous, which means it's textbook MAGA. It really is. I mean, it's important to remember that right now there is no evidence of a political motivation. As a matter of fact, the publicly available information about the investigation into the shooter reveals that he was also doing searches for political rallies for President Biden. So it's perfectly reasonable to assume that had President Biden been in Pennsylvania or been closer before the Trump rally, that there might have been another attempt on a completely different target, to say nothing of the fact that the shooter in question came from a conservative family and was himself a registered Republican. So to the extent that we can divine any sort of political affiliation, there's more evidence that he was Republican than not. So I just think the evidence completely undermines any sort of conspiracy. And it's just really, really gross and irresponsible for anyone, including Melania Trump, to cast such aspersions, especially when we're already at an inflection point. I mean, Trump supporters have been making threats to prominent election officials and judges and all sorts of people that they perceive to be Donald Trump's enemies. And that's been going on for years. We don't need to add any more to that, and certainly not at this time.
Absolutely. And remember, a point people made in the wake of the assassination attempt, and then we're seeing it play out further recently, is that there truly is just a basic difference between how powerful Democrats versus powerful Republicans respond to political violence. Completely universally, after the horrific attempt on Trump's life, you saw powerful elected Democrats, people in position of power, not random people online, denouncing it and wanting proper accountability. No jokes, none of that. Again, from powerful Democrats. But then you have Trump, to this day, over the last weekend, mocking the attack on Paul Pelosi, the bashing in of his head, something he's still recovering from. And it's disturbing, especially given you would think an event like that, as I try to engage with it, would lead some to engaging in introspection. How can I be better? How can I be less divisive, etc.? But instead, it's done the opposite for MAGA, where now they feel more justified in mocking political violence, even though that's something you or I, Josiah, finds reprehensible, even with someone like Trump.
Yeah, so the asymmetry, which, as you know, the asymmetry of expectation. Again, I feel like we should be paid royalties, Luke. I mean, my God, didn't we lead the charge on this? No, I'm kidding. But it is something that I recall vividly. You even took the time to point out when you appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored during your debate with a Republican operative. And I think it was something that even Piers himself, in a rare moment, and I say this all the time, Luke won't brag about himself, but I'm going to on his behalf because he's a friend and he did such a great job. But he accomplished the impossible, something that Mehdi Hasan, Destiny, other prominent liberal progressive debaters were unable to do, which is he was able to successfully turn for a brief moment Piers Morgan against MAGA in mere days after the assassination attempt on Trump. And you made the case so persuasively that, listen, you can point to, no, you stop it. No, you can point to so many examples of Twitter randos and people who are nominally aligned with the Democratic Party or the left who will say things. But the fact of the matter is that elected Democrats conduct themselves with a higher degree of consistent ethical behavior than elected Republicans. And I'm sorry, that is an important distinction, particularly when you're an eligible voter going to the ballot box. That is something where it's not a both sides issue. President Biden issued both a written statement and then spoke publicly, I believe twice, if I'm not mistaken, a preliminary kind of impromptu speech in front of the press and then a more formal speech condemning political violence. I don't know if the shoe is on the other foot, if Donald Trump, a hypothetical President Trump, would ever be capable of such a thing if it were his political opponent who had suffered such an attack.
And to your point about the facts we've learned about this shooter doesn't take away from how terrible of an act it was, or how tragic the death of the supporter of Trump was. As we learn about this supporter, about the shooter, we learn that actually it doesn't seem he was motivated by left-wing ideology and was going to look for some politician of any political ideology. But then the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi was specifically citing the 2020 election lies and how he felt that Nancy Pelosi was guilty of crimes because of that. And his plan, as shown in his interviews with investigators, his plan was to break into the house, wait for Nancy Pelosi to get there, tie her up, and if she didn't admit that she engaged in crimes related to the 2020 election, he would break her kneecaps. He shows up, she's not there, but Paul Pelosi is, and then we know what that led to. And so Trump couldn't get himself to denounce that, and instead jokes about it in the clips we've been watching on the show in the last few days, when it's way more directly connected to what he pushes on a daily basis. And not only does he not think, maybe I should stop lying about the election if stuff like this is happening, but also jokes about it, Josiah.
No, I mean, it really is incredibly gross. They did it. They were so cavalier about the attack on Paul Pelosi in its immediate aftermath. To your point, they continue to do so with no degree of introspection. And then on top of that, the demands, the incessant asymmetrical demands for civility from everybody else, but something they won't reciprocate. That's really what drives me nuts about this. Like, listen, I have pretty thick skin. And as gross as this sort of rhetoric can be, I could at least make my peace with it if there was consistency. So if the same MAGA Republicans who mocked Paul Pelosi's attack would also say, hey, listen, I don't care what you say about an attack on Donald Trump or whomever else because I'm consistent, then at least I could say, okay, there's that. But they take a bad situation, make it worse by gleefully unleashing invective against Democrats and their loved ones. Because remember, it would just be so bad if it were a Democratic politician. But Paul Pelosi is just married to a Democratic politician. He's not in office, which makes it even worse, even less acceptable. And then you take that and then you add a level of hypocrisy on top of it. The same people demanding that you denounce the Democratic Party, that Joe Biden fall to his knees and plead to Donald Trump to forgive him for something. I have no idea what it is exactly. Also want the right to insult and attack and mock with impunity. That does not work for me at all, and it shouldn't work for you either. You should demand, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, consistency. Whatever your standard is, pick one, apply it to everybody as faithfully as you can, and elected MAGA Republicans and MAGA influencers simply don't.
Absolutely true. Let's check in just quickly on the live NBC News coverage to see what's going on as the momentum, or the excitement, I should say, builds.
Are coming, whether he hurls insults at her while she's there in person. We'll see if he does. I suspect that she will brush them off pretty quickly and head into making sure she's putting meat on the bones of her policy, telling the country about the direction that she wants to take it, making sure that we shore up the middle class, making sure that the tax breaks go to the middle class and not the billionaire friends of Donald Trump. She's going to distinguish herself from Donald Trump in a strong way. And I think those insults, whether they come or not on the stage, she'll go right past them and make sure she's sticking to the issues that the American people will care about.
Yeah. So that is Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, Democrat, my governor. He's term limited. He is outgoing as we speak. Right now, the gubernatorial race in North Carolina is really, really important and potentially jeopardizing the Republicans' hold on that state, because Attorney General Josh Stein is a Democrat running to replace Governor Cooper, and his opponent is the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson. And Luke, this guy might be the craziest, most unhinged MAGA Republican in the country. And I really want you to think what that would mean given his competition. It's so bad that North Carolina, which is a purple state, it really is. For every one registered Democrat, you have a registered Republican. But Republicans, when they got in power, abused the hell out of the system. They gerrymandered it. They maximized their advantages. But they're at risk of losing all of that because they're running Robinson. And political experts believe that it's also jeopardizing North Carolina for Trump. That's how bad Robinson is.
It is. A part of it is what you're saying, which is if you're just thinking what's best for Democrats, maybe putting him up has been good because of the backlash to him. But it is disturbing how MAGA, they have in so many of these races enough of the support not to get a candidate that makes any sense in the general election, but to get a candidate they love and is extreme. In the primary, they have enough support. This is why MAGA is a losing political movement, and hopefully that will demonstrate itself in November again. But it's because they're extreme, and there's enough of the extremism that they can win the primaries. Then they get to the general, and often that doesn't work out, as we've seen with candidates across the country, especially in the midterms. But Mark Robinson takes it to another level where it's so disturbing, especially because it's not, to your point, the most red right-wing state by any means. And so in a purple state, even the Republican Party in North Carolina, enough of the electorate is so extreme MAGA, they would pick someone who said just horrific things about his political opponents, about minority groups, about
marginalized
women.
Groups. Yes. Yeah.
And most recently had a clip, maybe not most recently, but one of the things we talked about with him that was so weird is it seemed like he was talking about the left and was going on a rant about all the evil in our country. And remember, we're the evil to them. And then concludes it by saying some people need killing. Josiah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the fact that there is a greater than 0% chance that guy could become my governor is a huge, huge problem. And that's why I'm really.
You may have to move to DC with me.
Oh, bro. I mean, that might be the thing to make it happen. I love Charlotte. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's baffling. The upshot is, Luke, that the polls that I have seen have shown a surprising and encouraging gap between Attorney General Stein and Lieutenant Governor Robinson. I'll also point out, speaking of Attorney General of North Carolina, that Jeff Jackson, the Democratic congressman, veteran Democratic congressman who represents one of North Carolina's district, he was gerrymandered, unfortunately, out of his position by the Republican supermajority in North Carolina. He's the one who went viral with all the TikToks explaining everything. He is running to replace Attorney General Stein. So what could happen, and what I'm hoping happens, is Josh Stein, the current Attorney General, replaces Governor Cooper, defeats Robinson, and then Jeff Jackson becomes the Attorney General of North Carolina. It's possible, Luke, that my state is going to have a really, really good November, and it might be a bellwether for the rest of the country. That's all I'm saying.
And in North Carolina, based on the map that Trump is working with to win this election in the Electoral College, he needs North Carolina. And even at a point I've heard a lot of people making, even if he does barely eke out a win there, the fact that he's having to invest the resources he is in winning North Carolina when the other states are things he needs to be focusing on is a good sign. And there is just, I'm pretty sure in the margin of error, polls coming out back to back of Harris at Trump. So imagine, for the sake of your state, Josiah, if come November, you have those two folks that you'll be excited about, your state government better represented, and then Harris winning it. That's not too shabby.
No, again, there is a timeline in the multiverse where that happens, and I'm hoping we're living in it right now. One thing, Luke, before you jump on to the next thing, people in our chats are wondering, are we going to live stream the debate? And the answer is...
Yes, we think so. We might get blocked, so just stick around to see.
I was expecting a heck yes, and instead Luke gave like the appropriate disclaimer. That is absolutely our intention, but circumstances may force us to do something else entirely. But yes, that is the goal.
There is nothing
live stream
that can stop us except for the thing that can easily stop us. Okay. Here is a new Harris ad, and we'll react.
His lies never stop.
$35 insulin. You know who did that? I did that.
Obviously not true. Here's Joe Biden signing that piece of legislation.
During my 4 years, I had the best environmental numbers.
Trump rolled back environmental protections and dismissed climate change.
Project 25. I don't know anything about it.
Donald Trump has been at our organization. He's blessed it. He's very supportive of what we do.
I'm a better looking person. Roe v. Wade back to the States. No inflation.
I did nothing wrong.
Here's the truth. Donald Trump has been and always will be a liar.
Oof. You know,
spoiler alert.
What'd you say?
I said, spoiler alert, Donald Trump is a liar? What?
Hey, I thought we were supposed to find that out tonight. That's so...
I know.
You know,
what's up?
I'm happy they're pointing that out, and few things are as consequential as how dishonest Trump is, but it makes, so I know this is not the most important takeaway, it makes me so happy that they included in the series of lies a clip of him saying, I'm better looking than her. What? That's something else.
Perhaps the biggest lie he's told. I mean, it's actually, not only is it funny that they included that, but it also is illustrative in the sense that it gives a range, right? Because if the vice president tried to make an ad of every consequential lie that Donald Trump's ever told, it would be a 7-hour ad, right? So it basically gives you a smattering. It gives you a diversity. He lies about stupid things, obviously wrong things, elaborate things, and then things that are fundamental to American democracy, like the notion of stolen elections. Like, this guy will lie about anything at any time for any reason. So yeah, it's a devastating ad. Did you see the one that he dropped on Fox News earlier today about... you're smiling like you've seen it, so it's pretty good.
You reminded me. Let's see. What's that one? What keywords do I search to find that
I think
Obama
if you
one? Crowd.
If you look at Twitter, if you look at the one, it says we aired this on Fox News for no reason. That was the catchphrase. That was the slogan that they included on the tweet.
Okay, I don't know if this is the one you're referring to, but this made my day. Here's another
30
ad.
seconds. It's 30 seconds. Yes. That's it.
This is it. Okay. So this ad, they're specifically running in Philadelphia, in case Trump tunes into some of these outlets, and in West Palm Beach, Florida, in case he sees it there.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems.
Oh, she had a big crowd. Oh, the crowd.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes. It just goes on and on and on. America's ready for a new chapter. We are ready for a President Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
I'm Luke Beasley, and I approve the message. Shoot.
Indeed. Pondering politics gives it the stamp of approval. Absolutely brutal.
You know what the Harris campaign understands that so many Democratic campaigns haven't is trolling. Because what you're thinking is, who the cares about crowd sizes? Why are you putting that in an ad? No. It's specifically to get in Trump's head. And with how much money Harris is raising, I think she can afford a little bit to run specifically ads for an audience of one, because as they get under his skin, he becomes more outrageous and people see the true Trump better. And that's why tonight, what I want to get to soon, Josiah, is both of our thoughts about what needs to be done for us to classify Harris's performance as good, as effective, nailed it. And so we'll get to that. One thing I think she needs to do is try to get under Trump's skin, because he's going to try probably to come off more chill and not so unhinged. And she has an ability to trigger him. And we've been seeing that. And hopefully that happens on the debate stage. But even just in the campaign generally, he sees that. He's going to be truthing up a storm, posting more, oh, this is all AI. And that only drives a more accurate, but also politically effective narrative about the stable leader versus unhinged leader option that we have in this race.
No, 100%. Listen, I'm a big fan of The West Wing. I know that's cringe to a lot of people, but for the first 3 seasons, it was really, really good. It was really well written. We don't live in The West Wing. We don't live with a good faith opposition, principled conservative party. We don't live with a fictional version of the Republican Party. We live with the real Republican Party, which whose elected leaders are wildly, comically, dangerously authoritarian and unprincipled, and will say or do whatever they need to in order to win. And with that in mind, one of the best ways to disarm authoritarians is to mock them. I mean, Charlie Chaplin famously made fun of Adolf Hitler in the 20s and 30s, and it was a good way to help undermine the strongman fascistic image. And the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump has a bit of that, where he really needs to be feared and dreaded and be seen as larger than life. And so simultaneously, I think the Harris campaign has really struck this balance. They point out that the consequences of a second Trump administration are indeed quite dire, but the Trump himself is just a buffoon. He's an idiot. He's a loser. He's a thin-skinned, malignant narcissist. He is not someone to fear. You should fear putting him in power, but he himself is someone to mock relentlessly for the rest of his life. And I think that that's something that the vice president has to do. She has to never take the bait from him, which I think she will be very good at doing. I think she will not take the bait, but she should make it so that he always takes the bait. And I think the potential's there, given how well she handled Trump supporters and conservative, powerful figures when she was senator for California in the United States Senate. She went up against Jeff Sessions, Bill Barr, two prominent conservative Republican attorney generals. She went up against Brett Kavanaugh, and she was able to eviscerate them rhetorically. And I think she has all the ability to do that here, because Trump is actually dumber than all 3 of those men. So he is less formidable in so many ways. So yeah, I think that this is the sort of tone that she should be striking 100%.
Yeah. And don't think that this is the only stuff that we're seeing in terms of ads. We saw the lie ad, of course. Both those are a little bit more abstract, right? Lie, I mean, not that abstract, but there's also really strong policy ads we've been seeing, especially on reproductive rights. One area that Trump is just in panic mode over is the gender gap and how much Vice President Kamala Harris is dominating when it comes to female voters. One of the reasons, I'd say probably the most consequential reason, is that Trump's responsible for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so every story, many that will be cited in these ads of someone's life being destroyed, their health being threatened, their fertility being threatened, etc., because of abortion bans, people need to know, and this is definitely coming through in the Harris messaging, if you have to blame one person, a lot of people are to blame, but if you have to blame one, Trump's most to blame given the impact his election had on the Supreme Court. And Trump's only way of trying to win back thus far that I've seen those voters is flip-flopping out the wazoo on the issue of abortion rights, which I hope won't trick people into voting for him. And then also just saying, women love me. Josiah.
No, I mean, 100%. I think that the flip-flop and abortion thing is something the vice president should absolutely pummel Trump with rhetorically because, again, I assure you, I don't know if the moderators will ask Trump about his long and sordid history of flip-flopping various political and policy positions. If I had to bet, they're definitely going to ask the vice president that. Trump, as you know, is graded on a curve. But the vice president, if an opportunity isn't given to her, she should just create one herself to emphasize that, well, Trump not only over the course of many years has had a long history of being inconsistent on policy positions. On one of the ones which is most important to people, abortion, he flipped his damn position publicly 2 or 3 times in 24 hours. And again, I think that that's a point worth making. I know a lot of people don't like the whole whataboutism thing, but I'm sorry. I think the vice president has a responsibility to herself, her campaign, and to the American people to say, listen, whatever standard by which you grade Donald Trump and I on, it has to be the same standard. So if you don't like flip-flopping, fine. But I can defend my quote-unquote flip-flopping. I've had 5 years to advance my views, to change my views due to the rigors of governance. I have been the vice president of the United States, an executive, the second highest ranking person in the executive branch. I've had to govern. I've had to deal with the political reality. I can't snap my fingers and end fracking unilaterally. So what am I doing? I am proposing a more multifaceted approach. Yes, we are more energy independent than we've ever been. We are drilling and fracking more than we ever have. And it doesn't matter how I feel about that. That's the reality under my administration right now with President Biden. And also because I value transitioning away from fossil fuels. I put my money where my mouth is, and I cast the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the single greatest contribution to renewable energy in recorded history, not just United States history, but recorded history. So there is no contradiction. Meanwhile, this guy can't keep his story straight on the topic of abortion after ripping that right cruelly away from American women, millions of American women. He can't get his story straight in 24 hours. What about his flip-flopping? I'd love Donald Trump right now. Trump, I'll give you the next 30 seconds. I'll give you the remainder of my time to defend your position on this. And then, of course, he would do what he did at the Economic Club of New York. Listen, Ivanka and Don Jr., they've done so well on the topic of, on that particular topic. And the money that we'll be getting in from the taxes of other countries, child care is great. Next question. He'll have a moment like that. That's how I think she should.
The numbers that we're talking about in relation to the numbers are going to cause numbers that will make the numbers you're referring to not a concern. And then it's the most incoherent answer you've ever heard in your life. And he ends it with, which is why we need to make America great again. The crowd goes, yeah. Woo, nailed
Did
it.
you see, by the way, did you notice that Larry Kudlow was in there? I didn't clock that instantly, but Larry Kudlow from Fox was like,
yeah, Larry Kudlow. I've said to my audience before, it's not a long list. And I try not to bring up petty things like this too often. And I just keep seeming to do it. But he's on my list of giving me the heebie-jeebies whenever I see him talk. But yeah, I did not think about this until this morning. I think I saw a clip of Governor Gavin Newsom really, really effectively flipping that framing around about flip-flopping. And it made me so mad for a good hour how this isn't something any mainstream media host has yet been confronted with that I've seen, except for, I guess, Newsom bringing it up. But there needs to be an aggressive, what we just saw there from Josiah, the perfect delivery to some of these hosts, which is to say, totally confront Vice President Kamala Harris on flip-flops. Sure, Dana Bash, ask your 4 follow-up questions about fracking. But also, can you make it a deal with Trump too? Because in the case of Harris, the flip-flops happened over the course of years, in part as she assumed different roles, which makes a little bit of sense, right? Representing California is different than representing the entire country. And again, do that. But isn't it a little bit more notable when someone flip-flops multiple times in 48 hours? And don't even get us started on how many times, Josiah, Trump has flip-flopped over the course of years. They get so mad when you play that clip of Trump saying women need to be punished. there needs to be some sort of prison sentence for women who get abortions. They say, come on, right after that, they walked it back. Okay, well, then we play another clip of him saying that he would be in favor of a national abortion ban, but he doesn't know where the weeks marks would be. And then there's a different clip of him saying no national abortion ban, it's up to the states. And then he gets asked, okay, so no national abortion ban. And he says, I'm not going to answer that question. Which one is it? That's all happening in the last few months, other than the first example I cited. And I'm not hearing that brought up every 2 seconds, but I do hear every 2 seconds a perfectly fair conversation about the flip-flops of Kamala Harris. That is so enraging, Josiah.
No, it is. I mean, again, it goes back to the asymmetry of expectation. Here's the thing. This is the difference fundamentally. I shouldn't say the difference. It's one of many differences, but it is one of the most important differences which distinguish left-wing media, independent or legacy, versus right-wing media, independent or legacy, and the two parties. No one is asking you to not scrutinize Vice President Harris, President Biden, Democrats in general. We can take it. We want you to apply the same damn standard, one standard. And what that means is sometimes in life, and if there is any centrist or conservative watching this, first, please like and subscribe mine and Luke's channel. Please be sure to do that. Luke Beasley Show and at Pondering Politics. Like and subscribe. But here's the thing. I don't believe in grading on a curve. I am confident that my party and my candidates at least have a chance of doing reasonably well, no matter what your standard is, so long as the same standard is applied to the opposition. So if your standard, for example, is no flip-flopping, that's fine. It's kind of silly, but that's fine. But that should be the same standard for Republicans and Democrats, and that includes Donald Trump. And that means you can go after the vice president for flip-flopping over the span of 5 years. But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump also flip-flops. He does it more often. He's done it longer, and he's done it in a shorter period of time. The reason I'm okay with it is because I'm confident that we can survive the scrutiny. What makes things more difficult for the left of this country, for Democrats, is when media, and it's not just right-wing media, it is mainstream media, it is CNN, it is the New York Times, when they grade their special boy Donald Trump on a curve. It is irrational, it is dishonest, it is stupid. And I would love, eventually, after Trump leaves the political scene in 10, 20, 30, whenever it is, there will be classes taught at university about the grotesque failure of the American media to do its damn job. And you and I will be guest lecturers, I think.
I think so too.
Mic drop, baby.
Oh, Josiah, always so wonderful. Yeah, so on the day that Trump, hours before, way before, plenty of time to write up a story for New York Times. I don't know if you've seen this, Josiah, but on that day when Trump threatened election workers and said he's gonna bring, this is my wording, but the force of the government down onto them if they engage in fraud, which means if they don't engage in fraud for him, because fraud means that the other person wins, as we've seen from the last election. When he made this deranged True Social post, nothing about it on the front page of the New York Times. On the front page, though, the polls are tightening, and there was an op-ed that was like, my teenage son thinks the world's ending, ... he's true, or he's correct, or something. All this stuff, but no mention of the Trump thing. And so to your point, as I was talking about, I think in that segment when that originally came up on the show, there's this broken, I know we talked about it so much, but there's this broken mentality in much of media that favors the perception of neutrality over accuracy, objectivity. And what that means is, okay, if we have 10 bad things Trump has done in the last 24 hours, and one bad thing that Kamala Harris did, let's just throw that in for an example, we have to do 10 stories about the one bad thing that Kamala Harris did, so we can then do 10 stories about the 10 bad things that Trump did. See, because we're objective. No, that's not what objectivity is. That's just you trying to just meaninglessly project neutrality.
It's a false equivalence.
It's false equivalence. And why do they do it? Because they're so scared they're going to be accused of being liberal media. And even though they do all of that to not be accused of that by the right wing. What are they accused of, Josiah?
They're accused of it anyway. That's the whole point. I mean, it's funny. While you were talking, I was thinking of just a perfectly good example, which is recent. CNN moderated that disastrous debate between President Biden and Donald Trump. Afterwards, Trump repeatedly, publicly praised Jake Tapper and Dana Bash and CNN overall, saying, hey, they exceeded expectations. They were so fair. Then, in the prelude to the CNN interview hosted by Dana Bash of Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz, Donald Trump, the same Donald Trump, and the same MAGA Republicans who had praised CNN for their fairness and impartiality were then condemning it before the damn interview, and then even after the interview. So it's like you cannot earn MAGA's good grace or their you can't earn their approval. You really can't. It is temporary. It's fleeting. Because anytime you do anything that in any way makes Donald Trump look bad, they revoke it instantly. And it goes beyond the media. That attitude is pervasive, even among fellow Republicans. I mean, my God, Luke, think about you have people who used to lead the Republican Party, President Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, Governor and now Senator Mitt Romney, former Speaker Paul Ryan. They do the same thing with them. You were the standard bearer for the party. We once proudly followed you. But because you dare in any way spurn or criticize the current leader, anything that you ever did in your life no longer matters. Your decades of principled conservatism, your decades of loyalty to the Republican Party, it could be even years of loyalty to Trump himself. If you ever, for any reason, deviate from that, you are a heretic, and everything you've ever done is irrelevant.
Yeah. One-way loyalty street there with Trump. Quickly, I want to read here. Justin, thank you for gifting 5 memberships. And as Josiah said, even if you're not exactly in line with us politically, do like and subscribe. As we approach the debate, we are now 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Right? Am I right about that? That's crazy.
No,
I almost thought we had a whole other hour. No, yeah, 15 minutes from this historic debate. For those asking, we will be covering it live. We tried to get clarification on what the rules were, and it got even more confusing. I left that search more confused than I was going into it. If you're watching and you're thinking, gosh, there's no place I'd rather be, and it randomly shuts off, they came for us, and I do apologize. And there's not much we'll be able to do about that. But let's see. I've seen people asking about the join button for memberships. Some people aren't seeing it, but it should be there. If it's maybe you're on your phone, it's not there, and you might go to a computer. There should be a join button where the subscribe button is. Just like both those while you're there to save you a trip. And I think that's all we have. I will be reading chats as they come in, super chats, all sorts of different things. Maybe not so much while the debate's happening. And then one last thing, and then we'll talk about what we want to see in this debate. We are going to try something that you've never seen before. Maybe you have, but I've never seen this before, which is live fact checking. So it would be really annoying if I muted every time, because then the whole thing would be muted every time Trump's talking, every time a lie is told. So instead, thanks, Josiah. Instead, we're going to be popping up a little white box where I'll have typed, or Josiah will have typed you could see it there, how to look, the fact check, so that you can be watching. We're not going to interrupt your listening experience, but see live fact checking of the things that are being said. That's all I have. Josiah, give me your breakdown about what Harris should do strategically, what would constitute a good performance on her part tonight, and then I guess if you want to include what could make it disastrous for Trump, that would be interesting.
So, I mean, for me personally, we think about that question from 2 interpretations. What do I personally constitute a victory for the vice president? Being charismatic, being engaging, commanding the room, not taking the bait for Donald Trump, attempting at least to bait Donald Trump in turn. That is what I consider a win. The fact of the matter is these formats I don't think lend themselves particularly well, especially when your opponent is Donald Trump, to the sort of substantive scholarly debates like we would see at Oxford or at Harvard or University or whatever. I think this format lends itself well to rhetoric and performance. So for me, the vice president being cool, calm, and collected, funny, basically being herself, be the Kamala Harris that we have seen on this campaign tour. I mean, a transformed, joyful, happy warrior, somebody who can turn on the grit and the sass and the ferocity and, let it out when she needs to, pull it back, laugh the next. I mean, the person we've seen at the campaign trail, she's that Kamala Harris. She's going to win handily. As far as that question goes for the American public, this is where I think it gets complicated because, unfortunately, I think that the vice president, just by number one being a Democrat, is going to be held to a higher standard, unfortunately, than Donald Trump. But also as a black woman, I think, unfortunately, so many people in this country are going to hold the vice president to a higher standard in ways that I think are just wildly unfair, but are a fact of American political life at this day and age still, unfortunately. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that we have moved past where we were, certainly in 2016 and even in 2020. I vividly recall how people reacted to her debate against Vice President Pence. I thought she won the debate. I think a lot of people did as well. But there was so much nitpicking about her answers, and was she too mean and too assertive, that they would things that people would never say if the same words left the lips of a man, certainly a white man, and in the same tone. So unfortunately, I think that the public standard might be even more unfair to the vice president, but that's what victory looks like for me personally. For Trump, I would say, again, we have an asymmetry, what I would expect for a victory for Trump versus what the public will. I think if he doesn't fall over on stage, the American people, or at least 50% of them, will say,
True.
Yeah, Donald Trump did well. Sure, he lied. Literally everything he said. Sure, he couldn't speak substantively about, questions and policy, and he didn't answer questions directly, but words left his mouth sounds left his mouth hole. Therefore, Donald Trump gave an excellent performance. For me personally, I'm going to hold Donald Trump to the same standard. For Donald Trump to win, he has to be charismatic. He has to be funny. He has to be engaging. He has to attempt to engage with the answers. He has to attempt to engage to some degree to answer the questions directly. And for that reason, I think it's very unlikely that he wins this debate as far as satisfying me.
Okay. Yeah. Let me give mine. First, Nicholas Schroeder sent in a super chat saying, if it came down to it and you winning a rap battle against Trump determined the election, would you do it? Yes. I think Trump would be terrible at a rap battle. I'm not saying I would be great. I could figure it out though. But okay. But in all seriousness, I do think that we have to not. We'll definitely explain to people if Harris wins, but it's not every American's gonna see that sort of performance. We need to clarify that she won by telling the truth, by actually engaging with the questions, if indeed that's what happens, versus Trump's not even likely lies, just inevitable lies and dodging he's going to do in this debate. But I'm mostly concerned, as the crew sitting over there is still giggling about something. I do have to think about what would move the needle for sort of your undecided voters. And from what I've heard in these focus groups, what people are looking for, if they're focus groups with actual undecided voters, unlike one of them recently, it seems she's gonna have to nail the abstract stuff. Yes, there's a lot of substance-related things that she needs to effectively deliver on. The border, she needs to make solid points on the border. She has them. We've gone over them. They need to be made. Energy production, she needs to clarify for half or 60% of Americans who think that energy production was crushed under Biden-Harris, that's actually at record highs. Economically, that's a tough balance, but you have to make sure you both acknowledge the strong record of Biden-Harris, acknowledge how we recovered way more effectively than we would have under Trump and than any other country. But there's more to be done. And as president, she would be able to get some of those things done, especially if she had the House and the Senate, unlike Biden-Harris has now. And so those substance things matter. But I know, especially hearing a lot of these undecided voters just wanting to see a leader, presidential, right? She is going to have to come out giving the vibe of strength, of presidential, of not letting him bully her, all those types of things. And hopefully that will also be delivered on, even though it seems more trivial. It's not. And on the aesthetic or vibe or personality things, it's just true, as much as it triggers some to hear, that unfortunately still in this country, as Josiah just said, there are two different standards, and female politicians, much less a black female politician, is absolutely judged more aggressively by too many people compared to the male counterparts. And so we can't change that right now, the fact that that's the thing. So hopefully she's able to come out there and nail the more abstract things as well. And then which would you say, Josiah, which issue that you know is going to be asked about are you most looking forward to hearing the exchange on?
I mean, my first reaction is to say abortion, because it is the single biggest winning issue for Democrats electorally, and Donald Trump is really caught flat-footed on this between both his flip-flopping and his appointment of the 3 Supreme Court justices, which granted the Supreme Court the conservative majority necessary to overturn Roe v. Wade, and also Donald Trump's long sordid history of, threatening to prosecute, for example, women who seek abortions and things of that nature. So obviously that's one. But honestly, I have so many pet issues that I also want her to make a really compelling case, which I know she has, number one, the ability to, and certainly the facts on her side. I imagine Donald Trump is going to reference Afghanistan. You know that that is something I cover quite a bit on my channel, given that was number one, America's longest war, number two, a major foreign policy event, number three, a major electoral event, because it was the beginning of the end of President Biden's popularity, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I want her to defend, or at the very least, make sure that Donald Trump does not emerge unscathed with respect to blame for Afghanistan, because it's simply true. He set the Biden administration up for grotesque failure. Also, the economy, to your point, I think that, I understand that she has to walk a fine line with respect to the economy, because consumer sentiment is what it is, and you can't lecture people into having a completely different worldview. But I am a firm believer, there's data to support it, that so much of the perception of the economy is indeed fueled by a partisan lens. Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winning economist, has talked about this at length, that there's a vibes-based economy, and that if Donald Trump wins the election, based on the data, we will see within weeks a major flip about feelings about the economy, even if the trends stay exactly the same. And I think we have an obligation to try to fight back on that, to say, actually, no, there were good things, remarkable things accomplished economically under the Biden-Harris administration that we absolutely must lay claim to, even while recognizing, to your point, that there's a lot of work to be done left, but also that Donald Trump inherited a damn good economy from President Barack Obama. He did not create so many people operate under the belief, because Trump says it and he is not appropriately fact-checked. He just marched into office January 20th, 2017, and with 2 sticks single-handedly created the American economy as we know it. But then you can't count that last year. So he just gets to have it always. And I think the vice president, to the best that she's able, needs to make the case that Donald Trump inherited a good economy from my predecessor, Barack Obama. He drove it into the ground in under 4 years. He wants you to forget about all of that. And he wants to pretend that Democrats are single-handedly responsible for every economic pain in the world. Here's what we've done to make progress on this issue. Here's what I intend to do if I become president to make even more progress. Donald Trump wants to just cut taxes for the rich and coast on the economic trends created by the Biden-Harris administration.
Beautifully said. Before responding to all of those joining now, I'm seeing the numbers tick up and up as we get moments away from this debate. I'm going to be honest, my tummy is filled with butterflies right now in a way that it hasn't been in quite some time. What a night it is. Quickly, Alien Me wrote in a super chat saying, thank y'all for your hard work. You have Jenna saying welcome, or becoming a member. You have someone saying Harris Waltz 2024. You have someone named Cassie Wentland saying, huge fan, incredible work. Thank you all so much. Man, it's here. We will, I'm going to say one more time for those just joining, we will be, just so y'all know, I know who Cassie Wentland is. That's why if you can hear the guys laughing in the background while they're laughing. We will be covering this live as long as ABC allows us, and hopefully they believe in the public service that presidential debate should be, in the right that Americans should have to watch it, and not be just using this as a money grab. Josiah, any lingering thoughts about the debate as it gets closer?
No, I think we're almost there. I am, again, surprisingly confident, not particularly nervous at all, which is unlike me, folks. Those of you who follow me at Pondering Politics, youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. Please like and subscribe. You know that I am a cynic by nature, but tonight it could just be the soothing presence of one of the greatest political commentators in American history. This guy up here, Luke Beasley, could be his soothing presence, but I am feeling optimistic. I believe the vice president will carry the day.
I hope so. One thing that you mentioned earlier that is super, super sort of reoccurring in its presence in my mind is how Trump's able to say, no matter that people know there were still issues, right, when Trump was president, even before the pandemic, and then everything collapsed, and by every single analysis that's credible at all, Trump exacerbated the economic pain and public health pain because of his mishandling and the fact that it wasn't taken seriously, and admitted he was downplaying it for political purposes, thus not prepping properly. So, but still, people don't really get that mad at him for saying, I built the greatest economy, even though he just inherited the Obama economy. But everyone gets so mad when Biden-Harris, and most relevant here, when Vice President Kamala Harris dares to point to the fact that, yes, even with the pain that exists, as it's real, and she wants to do more about it, comparing what the expectations were economically post-pandemic, in part because of the mishandling by Trump, and our global counterparts, and just looking into the text of the legislation, the projects, and the thousands of projects that are invested in, whether it be infrastructure or prescription drugs-related legislation, there's a strong record there. One of the best we've seen in modern American history. And it's weird that if Trump had a 10th of that record, legislatively and in the recovery, he would say he was the best thing that ever existed, as he already does, and that he caused all of that. All of right-wing media would accept it, and some of mainstream media would go, well, I mean, a lot of people in this country think Trump's Jesus. Is he? I don't know, maybe so. And it just doesn't work the other way around. And so I agree. I don't like this advice that Harris has been getting of sort of run away from the record and really distinguish yourself from Biden. And let's actually cut live to the debate.
Presidential
Here we
debate.
go,
We
folks.
want to welcome viewers watching on ABC and around the world tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump are just moments away from taking the stage in this unprecedented race for president.
And I'm Lindsay Davis. Tonight's meeting could be the most consequential event of their campaigns, with Election Day now less than 2 months away. For Vice President Kamala Harris, this is her first debate since President Biden withdrew from the race on July 21st. Of course, that decision followed his debate against President Donald Trump in June. Since then, this race has taken on an entirely new dynamic.
And that brings us to the rules of tonight's debate. 90 minutes with 2 commercial breaks. No topics or questions have been shared with the campaigns. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions, and this is the clock. That's what they'll be seeing. 2 minutes for rebuttals and 1 minute for follow-ups, clarifications, or responses. Their microphones will only be turned on when it's their turn to speak. No pre-written notes allowed. There is no audience here tonight in this hall at the National Constitution Center. This is an intimate setting for 2 candidates who have never met.
President Trump won the coin toss. He chose to deliver the final closing statement of the evening. Vice President Harris selected the podium to the right.
So let's now welcome the candidates to the stage. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
See you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their #1 issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because there was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that she and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all, in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us, and I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
President Trump will give you a minute here to respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic, and the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died, has there been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce-back jobs. These were jobs bounce back, and it bounced back, and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse. Mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
That's just a soundbite. They gave her that to say. Look, I went to the Wharton School of Finance, and many of those professors, the top professors, think my plan is a brilliant plan. It's a great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our value as a country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off, she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan, and it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, oh, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this, because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have, and who's going to have higher prices, is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country, because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I do want to ask for your response. And you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. "Thank you, President Xi!" exclamation point. When we know that she was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban, because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, "I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks." But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
Well, the reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, is doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened. And now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban, because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states. And the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart. And they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter, because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came to your desk?
Well, I won't have to, because, again, 2 things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50, essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look, her boss went out and said, we'll do it again. We'll do it a different way. And he went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been, part of the reason they lost, to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free. But they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D., and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look, we don't have to discuss it because she'd never be able to get it, just like she couldn't get student loans. They couldn't get student loans. They didn't even come close to getting student loans. They taunted young people and a lot of other people that had loans. They can never get this approved. So it doesn't matter what she says about going to Congress. Well, wonderful. Let's go to Congress. Do it. But the fact is that for years they wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government. And we did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And now you have a vote of the people on abortion.
Vice President Harris, I want to give you your time to respond. But I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
I absolutely support reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade. And as you rightly mentioned, nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America. And understand what has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments. What is happening in our country? Working people, working women who are working 1 or 2 jobs, who can barely afford childcare as it is, have to travel to another state to get on a plane sitting next to strangers to go and get the health care she needs. Barely can afford to do it, and what you are putting her through is unconscionable. And the people of America have not, the majority of Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, and that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
Vice President Harris,
excuse me, I have to respond. Another lie. It's another lie. I have been a leader on IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader. In fact, when they got a very negative decision on IVF from the Alabama courts, I saw the people of Alabama and the legislature 2 days later voted it in. I've been a leader on it. They know that, and everybody else knows it. I have been a leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing, you should ask, will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month?
Come on.
Okay, would you do that? Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you answer the question? Would you
because
veto?
Under Roe v. Wade,
answer the question, would you veto?
You could do abortions in the 7th month, the 8th month, the 9th month,
not true.
and probably after birth. Just look at the governor, former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to give you a response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as the rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme. You know, this is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formally worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people, not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper. He was no good. I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book. Because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any president, sitting president, in history by far.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country, and they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it. Because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him.
True.
It's up to the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation that went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of the, at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking, because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work, to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your response?
First of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Don't lie.
She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish, one thing so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead, we'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out of it. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that we
for the
have to get
environment,
to.
as
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, well, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America? They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world, and crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just ask you,
David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle, they went into Seattle, they took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask you.
You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this. You talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The President of the United States, you'll get him out of bed. You'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Right. You'll say, come on down to the office. Let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue, this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
That.
You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, There's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about an election as fraudulent. We need two things. We need walls. And we have to have it. We have to have borders. And we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them Republican.
No judge looked at it.
And said
they said we didn't have standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker, so he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people.
Ooh.
So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, Mr. President.
Let me just say about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline. The XL pipeline in our country, he ended that. But he let the Russians build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president. But when this weak, pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her. But he got 14 million votes. They threw him out. She got 0 votes. And when she ran, She was the first one to leave because she failed, and now she's running. I don't understand it, but I'm okay with it because
your time is
I think
up.
we're going to do very well.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
They're the ones, and she's the one that caused it, that's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it, because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? Because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
Luke, buddy. Oof.
I think I have. Hello?
Buddy.
I think I've
Can you hear me?
lost. Oh. Talk,
I can hear
sorry?
you just fine.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I'm back.
Yeah. So, ouch. Not looking good for the former president.
Yeah, let me just get up on screen, Jade. Oh. Hello then. My monitor doesn't show that. Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa. Where do we start? We don't have much time. The fact that Vice President Kamala Harris was able to get in those digs that were just aggressive enough to make Trump really mad, but not going overboard. And he clearly, about the crowds thing, took the bait. About the election-related stuff, took the bait. The line of the evening, I don't have it jotted down, but it was something to the effect of 81 million people fired you, and you're really struggling to accept that. Josiah.
No, listen, it's been a phenomenal performance by the vice president. I'll tell you, for a brief moment, my optimism dropped because she was visibly nervous during her first answer. But man, she found her footing pretty quickly. It helps that her opponent is a malignant narcissist, a pathological liar, and just a genuine moron. But yes, she is doing extremely well. She is dropping the bait. He is picking it up left, right, and center. I feel like so far my optimism is vindicated. She has roasted him left, right, and center. He has lied. I am seeing on social media that conservatives are very upset because of the biased moderators. How dare they ask tough, fair questions of the political candidate? I think that so far this has been incredibly, incredibly good.
Yeah, I agree. We should acknowledge, because this is going to be, I can already see the Fox News compilation of sort of the noise you could hear when she would swallow and clear nerves. If that's the biggest critique, all right, because the points, one of the things she's criticized for sometimes, especially by MAGA, but sometimes by others, is being too vague on stuff. But what she's been doing, and it's especially notable comparing to Trump's we did everything perfect and everything's terrible now, failing nation, Hannibal Lecter, sort of not clear on specifics, see his childcare answer, to see her go through and list the specific names of people who worked for Trump, who now speak out against him. Go through, even at the beginning when she was coming off less confident, she was listing off specific policies, which is a critique of hers that she doesn't have specific policies. She does, and she listed them there. And then I think in the areas that you would say, are weakness, even if they shouldn't be, in terms of attack lines Trump was going to use, he didn't get them off. He wanted to really be able to land something on the 9th month of pregnancy talking point. It didn't land right because it came paired with the post-birth, and he's lying about all of that. Obviously, only medically necessary abortions based on some health crisis.
I just want to say on that score, Luke, it's also important to remember that the moderators, kudos to the moderators for fact checking that and saying that there are not post-birth executions of babies. I think that was a really important fact check. It's sad that that's an important fact check, but here we are. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's so sad. I'm realizing we have 43 seconds left, so let me just give a little bit more and then throw to you so you can give your final thoughts. I am so glad she brought up the points. Does she watch the show? Termination of the Constitution. No one ever brings that up in terms of politicians. They brought it up. Yes.
She watched Luke Beasley. She watched Luke Beasley shred me bake on this. Yeah, of course.
Brought up the sexual abuse case. That came off effectively. Brought up record oil production. The January 6th related question. Trump just came off deranged because he did his normal things. Point is, there are areas where Trump would have been dishonest and would have been bad, but could have delivered it better, and it could have come off to your average voter like, oh, okay, maybe he's being honest there. At the moments where he had an opportunity to hit her, he completely flopped in my mind, mostly. Sorry, your thoughts?
No, I was just going to say he totally imploded. I agree. She rattled him so successfully that, yes, at the areas in which he should be able to land a blow, he tripped over himself. Again, the rallies thing is a great example. He ate so much time up trying to defend his own damn rallies. I am so excited to see what the next 45 minutes has in store.
I agree. And it looks like that was a countdown to NBC's coverage continuing. Oh. And so we have some more time. That was just a commercial break, right? It's not over.
No, it was a commercial break.
Okay.
He's going to get, I will say, someone in chat asked, I'm curious what your thoughts are. Why is it that Trump seems to either be given or simply takes the final word on every question? That does seem to be a recurring pattern.
That is weird. Here's the broadcast.
We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for $250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left, I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, Do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also, as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier, and please, I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow, much happier than he is right now. But eventually, you know, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening. But he does have that, something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief. And the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
We've talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I want to move on to Afghanistan.
Stoltenberg said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen. He's the head of NATO. He said, I've never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying, one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. Otherwise, we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So, if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, you know, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, it was we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I want to move on.
And these people did the worst withdrawal and, in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your 3rd time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country, and they come up with things like what she just said. Going back many, many years, when a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park 5, they admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time is up.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction, to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President Trump, we have to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy, please.
She has a plan to defund the police. She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she
we
has
do
a
have to
plan
move on
to
to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay.
That's what her plan is until just recently.
I just need
Lindsay,
to
go ahead.
respond because
Trump,
the
President
former
Trump,
president has said something twice that I need to respond to.
I'm sorry. We're going to move on, Vice President Harris.
President
Trump, this is now your third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better.
Correct.
Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this. I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it. They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up. They wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones, too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that, and you'll be hearing about it in the not-too-distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run health care system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private health care options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff. As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said, at the time because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president and we over the last 4 years have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it, pass this prologue in terms of where Donald Trump stands on that.
I want to move to an issue that's important for a lot of...
She made a mistake. At number one, John McCain fought Obamacare for 10 years. But it wasn't only him. It were all of the Democrats that kept it going. And you know what? We can do much better than Obamacare, much less money. But she won't improve private insurance for people, private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to get. People are paying privately for insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need immediately.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
It didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. It's going, they're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill the United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it. Between him and his son, they get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why is he? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife? Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates. An historic night, this ABC News presidential debate from Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
It just keeps getting better and better. It just
Agreed.
keeps.
Agreed. Yes, I can. What do you think?
Sorry, there's a lot going on. I wish y'all could see. There's too many. Okay, I love Jaden and the crew, Cole, Ben, but they have found a way to maximize screens where I have so many things going on around. I have 4 different screens. So if you see me getting confused, that's why. But okay, let's see what I jotted down. If you have any initial thoughts, throw them at me.
Listen, I think the momentum, she is maintaining it perfectly. I mean, Trump is obviously rattled. He's derailed. He is lying compulsively. I will say, for all the right-wingers complaining that the moderators are biased, they are letting Trump get the last word in every damn time. And as a matter of fact, they're offering more pushback to Vice President Harris the scant few times that she has attempted to get the final word. So I would argue that there's a pretty staggering asymmetry here. Now, of course, they'll say, but Donald Trump's being fact-checked more. Well, it's because Donald Trump is lying more, so that might explain it. But other than that, she's doing really well. I'm so happy that she made a point to hammer Trump on the Afghanistan situation. Donald Trump said, what did he say? He said, I dealt with the Taliban. He said something. It went viral. I have to look it up. I made fun of him for it. But yeah, he's just genuinely floundering, and she's doing extremely well under the circumstances.
Yeah. I was really happy to see the way she broke down her meeting with Zelensky before the invasion of Ukraine, because something about how she, concern people have is what has she been doing? That's what some undecided voters I've heard say. I just don't know where she's been, what has she been doing all this time until she became the candidate. And does she really have experience? She does, obviously. Look at her resume, it's insane. But then also, that little moment where she rapid fire listed off all the things that she did leading up to the invasion of Ukraine to contribute to why there's such unity around Ukraine and the support of them by our allies and, of course, us. And also why so many people predicted. I haven't seen anyone predict that Ukraine would have standed as strong as they have. And you have to attribute that to their strength and also to the strength of support that has been sent their way and the preparation days before that Kamala Harris broke down. I agree. Finally, Afghanistan was turned on Trump. And I don't know why for so long Democrats have had really weak responses to the dishonest talking points Trump will espouse on that. But there you heard a really good reaction. And then I thought the response from Trump on the quote unquote turning black comment about Vice President Kamala Harris was a disaster, because he tried, in debate prep, they said, don't. And so he went,
for the love of God, don't do it. Fake a heart attack, do anything. Do not answer the question.
Don't do it.
And he just went right into it.
And then he went, but she said that she wasn't. And then she just got to look way more
You just
reasonable.
saw one bead of sweat roll down his temple, and he's just like, it's like
a blob of orange makeup just.
Yeah, and
then I thought that she perfectly, because she could do something that would be justified, but not as aesthetically effective politically, which would be to sort of show the way that she's offended by those comments. Instead, she said, you see that? You see the vile, childish nature of the person standing next to me? You know what I want to do? I want to unite all races. I don't want this sort of garbage in the White House. I think all Americans should unite around these good American values, regardless of background, race, gender, etc. And that was just, perfect.
No, I think that she pivoted extremely well. She redirected. I was actually, quite frankly, Luke, surprised that she engaged with it even as substantively as she did. I think she handled it masterfully, but I expected her to actually use the line she did from the CNN interview where she's like, old, tired, playbook, next question. So she actually did something riskier. She engaged with it, but she brilliantly redirected into a more unifying message. I think it was very well done.
And he's clearly getting rattled because he said, we're wasting our time here. And then he's starting to sort of shout more. And I do want to say, in situations like this, justifiably, all sorts of criticism will be levied the way. And it looks like we're about to come back in, but will be levied the way of the moderators. I think there's problems you're mentioning. I didn't really notice that until now. But I think overall they've been doing all right.
And Harris, we begin with you.
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And I do believe that the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us, and we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA, I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it, and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack. We're not going to take fossil fuel. We're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision. But I just ask one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us.
And there it is. The
Yikes!
first and likely only presidential debate of the 2024 election between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And it went really well, Josiah. It really did. I guess, should we sort of recap? Let's try to go through some of the points we've made from top to bottom. We both agreed.
Yeah. So
yeah, sorry. Go.
I was just
go
going
ahead.
to say real quick. I just feel that my rare optimism was totally vindicated. Madam Vice President, future Madam President, my faith in you was vindicated. Thank you. I'm sorry.
You know, I'm sure if you're a viewer of Josiah's, you pick up on his character. I didn't say it was positive yet. On
touche.
on his show, and one of the things that we mentioned is the sort of the cynicism, but you should all thank your lucky stars that you're seeing this hyped, optimistic Josiah, because it's pretty unique. I think it's a good sign, because I could be walking into a blazing fire and somehow think it's going to be okay.
You'll be like, damn, what the nice glow. It's so toasty in here. Yeah, exactly.
Yikes. Yeah. So I'm so curious I'm trying not to look at Twitter or the other mainstream outlets and how they're reporting on this. I'm curious what the headlines are going to be, what the takeaways are going to be. Do you think, obviously the last debate was Biden cognitive situation. Do you have yet formulated a clear idea of what the broader, not right-wing crazy media, but the broader mainstream media narrative is going to be about this?
They will, I believe that the overwhelming consensus will be that the vice president won this debate. I think it will be reflected in the polls. Even if Fox conducts a poll, because Fox is, believe it or not, a reputable pollster, I think it will be reflected even in the Fox poll. I think that the only difference is that right-wing media will acknowledge that she had a better night than Trump. They'll just lean much more into the questions were pointed and biased. And obviously, again, I'm not talking about Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. I'm talking about like the so-called straight news people at Fox, where they just do the straight hard news. I think even they, like Brett Baer and Dana Perino, I think they'll admit the vice president did better than they expected. I think they'll have, did I lose you?
I
just want to make sure.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. Somebody tried to call in on Discord. Sorry about that.
Oh, gosh.
So I think that they'll all say the consensus will be that the vice president won the debate. It's just that right-wing media will suggest that the moderation was biased.
Which, so they did that even a little bit with the Trump Biden CNN debate, until it really was clear that wasn't the beneficial narrative to go with. And in preparation for this, you heard Alex Jones saying that Kamala Harris is going to be on drugs and all this crazy stuff, obviously indicating the fear that she was going to do as well as she did tonight. And then also you heard the attacks preemptively against the host. And what I want you, audience, to sort of use as your metric is the more rage towards the moderators you see in right-wing media, or Trump, if he starts true socialing about how unfair ABC News, I knew it was a rigged debate. All they're saying is what we're saying in different words, which is Kamala victory, right? That this debate went well for her. They're just using different words because they are coping.
No, 100%. And what will be interesting too is, I want to say this, right? There was the opportunity, and there have been suggestions of follow-up debates. We the way that we have prepped for this, the way that we've talked about in our videos, this is the first and perhaps only debate. My question is after a performance like tonight, will there be a follow-up debate? Because I would argue, I'm confident that if there were a second debate, she would still beat him. But Luke, what do you think? Should the vice president make this the one and only and just kind of leave this as the searing impression?
Isn't that so tough? Because the two arguments in favor of Harris from her perspective are, this one went so well, leave it there. That's the taste you want to leave in people's mouth before the election. And there's only 50 plus days into the election. Okay. That compels me. And we heard everything we're going to hear from Trump. He has about 10 talking points. He goes back to them. So do we really need to hear that again? Compelling. The other side, though, is a big problem for Harris is that people don't feel like they know her well enough. I'm curious to see the impact on polling of this debate, because now you got to see and be introduced to Vice President Kamala Harris if you weren't already as a voter. But maybe based on how this went, she'll actually favor doing a second if she doesn't see the bump and pulls she wants to. Let me see what Governor of Pennsylvania Josh Shapiro is saying right now on NBC.
Chaos
chaos of Donald Trump's time in office. Well, I'll tell you what, I think Kamala Harris cleared that brain fog out, reminded people of the disaster that he was as president. And I think it was also clear as she was laying out a vision to take this country, Donald Trump didn't have a clear vision on where he wanted to go. Instead, it was more grievance and division, more attacks on other people. And Donald Trump, I think, will make our country less safe, more chaotic, and less free. And Donald Trump prosecuted the heck out of the case tonight. Well, Kamala Harris prosecuted the case tonight. Pardon me.
Oh, against Donald Trump. Got you. Okay, got you. I thought Donald Trump toward the end finally got around to what he was hoping to accomplish, which is say, if you have all these plans and you have all this vision, Kamala Harris, you've had 3.5 years to do it. Why haven't you? So what is the answer to that?
She has served as vice president. She knows the job to be president. Now she has laid out her vision for where she wants to take.
All right, let's quickly break from that. Why don't they answer that question the way I want them to? I don't know. Just say there's so much more to do. Republicans keep obstructing us. We don't know why. Yes, we do. They like problems more than like solutions because they can run on them for political reasons. But look what's happened even with that obstruction. And then go through the list. The huge investments in manufacturing, the economy that outpaced other countries, the crime plummet that happened after the spike that happened under Donald Trump, the investments in infrastructure, doing what Trump said he was going to do over and over again, like his healthcare plan, and never actually got it done. The fact that more people have health insurance in the United States right now than ever before. The fact that the United States brought down inflation way more rapidly and effectively and then lower than our G7 counterparts because of the pandemic impact on inflation globally. Yes, there's more to do. Obviously, that's why she's running for president. But this idea that she's making all these promises and has no record as vice president, her participation in the Biden administration, to bolster the legitimacy to her promises going forward is absurd.
Yeah. So again, this is something that's, I think, that you could just effortlessly spin on Trump himself. Like, you were president for 4 years, not vice president. You were president, and apparently you were just the greatest there ever was. You were a better president than Washington and Lincoln. That's what you say. You have a loftier sense of your own accomplishments and your own abilities. Why couldn't you build a wall? Why couldn't you cap insulin at $35? Why couldn't you repeal and replace Obamacare? Why couldn't you, allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices? Why couldn't you pass infrastructure? Why couldn't you get us out of Afghanistan? We can play this damn game all damn day, Donald, and I'll win. So how about we not do that? How about we're adults here and we say that because of the Republicans in Congress, and quite frankly, because of you pulling the strings from Mar-a-Lago, there are things that I can't get done because I also not just need to win my election, but since you teed it up for me, Donald, let me just say, Americans, it is vitally important not only to keep Donald Trump out of the White House and put me in the White House, it's vitally important to give me a cooperative Congress. Because Donald Trump doesn't understand how the federal government works. He thinks that because, of course, he's an authoritarian and he's a wannabe dictator, he thinks only about himself. But there are two other branches, and we have to account for them. So this is what I will do. This is what I want to get done. But I need to be president, and I need Democratic majorities in both chambers of Congress, and then we will be able to get done what we want to do. And the proof is in the pudding, Americans. When we had a Democratic president and Democratic control of Congress, we passed the American Rescue Plan, which created 4 million jobs and avoided a double-digit recession, put money in the pockets of American citizens. We were able to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, delivering on a promise in 1 year that Donald Trump promised for 4 years he would do and failed to deliver, which means, objectively speaking, quantitatively, we are 4 times as good as Donald Trump because we got it done in 1 year. He tried and failed for 4. We passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is the single biggest piece of comprehensive gun safety legislation in 30 years. We passed the Chips and Science Act, which has presided over a manufacturing boom, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, billions upon billions of dollars of semiconductor manufacturing chips in this country, compared to Donald Trump, who presided over a net export of manufacturing jobs and 0 semiconductor manufacturing chips. The PACT Act, which expanded veterans' health care, because the Democrats, we actually care about America's veterans. Donald Trump doesn't. We actually got out of Afghanistan. Donald Trump set us up for grotesque failure. We still got it done. And if he wants to talk about troop deaths, if he wants to evaluate that as a grisly statistic, that's how we evaluate successful presidencies, more American troops died on his watch than ours. So I don't think he wants to go down that route and just go on and on and on like that and demonstrate the vast disparity in terms of legislative and executive accomplishments. But that's how I'd like her to answer that question.
My political commentator crush for you, Josiah, has never been stronger after that. That was brilliant. Let's see how some undecided voters are reacting to this debate.
Hannah.
Manipulative.
And Andrew.
Lies on both sides.
Okay.
Lies.
Like what?
You came in all undecided. Has anything changed your mind tonight? Is there anything you heard here that you thought, oh yeah, I could go for that policy. I could stand with that candidate?
Not really. For me, I think Kamala had a good debate. I'm feel more favorably towards her than to Donald, but I'm still not sure. Not 100%.
The two of you women reacted very strongly when Harris was talking about abortion. When both candidates were talking about abortion rights, you reacted strongly to Donald Trump and his positions. You seemed emotional about it, Hannah.
Yes.
What was your thought on that? What was it about that part of the debate that struck you?
His misinformation. He sensationalized just so much facts or not things that are not facts that have been disproven.
When he was talking
he
about
does it because that is what his supporters want to hear, and it really impacts who people like us if we choose to vote for him or not, because we know you are lying, but you're still saying it, and it's disgusting.
You all said it was the economy.
And still undecided?
How you're thinking about their economic policies.
No, because at the end of the day, December and November is going to roll around, and they're going to pass. They're going to say we're going to shut down the government, and they're going to pass an omnibus, and they're going to spend trillions of dollars, and nothing else is going to change. They're just going to keep spending money uncontrollably. Donald Trump spent $6 trillion in 2019 and added that to our deficit. So absolutely not. They're spending money, and then it's coming back into the government, into the congressmen, into the Senate, through funds, through PACs, through all the disgustingness.
Andrew, thank you so much. Hannah, Lynn, it's great to be with you. I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Kate, thanks very much.
I didn't quite understand that last one necessarily, but I want to be thoughtful. I want to be kind. What is the reason for undecided? I want to hear, because a lot of times it's like, oh, I just want to see which one, has the better proposals. You can just go look at their proposals. Like, they're already there for you, available. Again, I say with love, and people have busy lives. I get that, and so then they're tuning in now. Fair, but I'm just saying, you didn't have this debate wasn't the only moment where you can make that decision. There are also a bunch of other things.
I should also say that the vice president, I know some people were complaining about this, and I'm trying to be as charitable as possible and say that I understand why people complained about this, but they said that, there was no formal issues page on her website, that she wasn't talking about policy. And she did in her various speeches, in her CNN interview and other places, but there is a formal policies page now on her website if you want to look at it word for word. Again, I'm not in office. I'm not running for office, so I can be perfectly bluntly candid. There is no rational basis for being an undecided voter when Donald Trump is the alternative. There's just not. There's a reason that so many lifelong conservative Republicans have turned away from Trump, even though they despise the vice president when it comes to policy. They recognize that some things, as important as policy is, that there are some things that trump, pun intended, even policy, and that is the future of our democracy. You can't have policy if the system that allows for policy is compromised or corroded entirely, which is the threat that Trump poses. And then you can have a subjective back and forth about which party has better policy. I would argue that the proof is overwhelmingly clear that the Democrats have a better record with that, even on the economy, even though obviously the perception is to the contrary. So, yeah, I don't particularly see it, but I think it goes down to just centuries of duopoly, centuries of partisanship, the fact that the right enjoys so many institutional advantages, as we've discussed, both politically in the terms of the Electoral College and gerrymandering and 30 state legislatures that they control, a right-wing Supreme Court, and then, of course, in the media, both alternate and legacy, Republicans enjoy a colossal advantage. That is why they're able to punch above their weight class, and why simply having a little R next to your name allows for anybody, even someone who's uniquely unqualified and disqualified even as Donald Trump, to be competitive in an election in this country.
Brilliantly said. Tonight we saw a liar and a truth teller. I'm sure someone's going to find in the nitty gritty something, a stat that was said wrong by Harris. But from what we could tell, a pretty honest performance. One that provided specifics, contrasted against Trump's just sort of screaming about things that he perceives as problems without articulating solutions. And we saw a much more presidential Kamala Harris than the disaster that is, ironically, the former president, and an ability for Vice President Kamala Harris to get under Trump's skin in a way that didn't come off as too aggressive or outside the bounds of this sort of debate, but instead gave the American people a chance to really see that split screen between how unhinged in reality, even sometimes he tries to pretend like something's otherwise. In reality, the unhinged Trump we saw is the Trump that exists and the Trump that would govern. And the strategy that Harris came into the debate with, the plan that she executed, her points about her came off correctly for the most part, with some little mess ups here and there. And her interactions with Trump were absolutely executed correctly. Josiah, final thoughts?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I felt a surge of optimism before this debate. I wasn't too concerned about it going into it. I feel that my rare optimism was vindicated, and I feel better just overall about even the election, although it remains to be seen how determinative this debate will be. But there's no question that the vice president won. And man, I really enjoyed hanging out with you during this debate. And you know what? Honestly, when the winners and losers are tabulated by CNN and Fox and MSNBC, I think what they're going to say is one of the winners was Josiah from Pondering Politics, because he got to review this debate on live stream with Luke Beasley. I think that's what they're going to say. I think that's what they're going to say.
You are something special, Josiah. It was a delight. Thank you all so much for joining us, for witnessing history together. And we'll have much more coverage of it on our respective shows. That's Luke Beasley on YouTube and Pondering Politics on YouTube. Do subscribe